Hello, you're watching Euronews Tonight. I'm Alistair Sanford. Let's have a look at today's main headlines. Ukraine refutes claims it sent saboteurs into Russia after Moscow says it killed 5 on its soil. Putin weighs up whether to recognize breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine as tensions rise further. Summit or no summit? After Biden agrees in principle to meeting Putin, Moscow says such talk is premature. Are we on a path to dialogue or to war? Airlines cancel flights to Kiev as the outside world gears up for potential conflict. But so far, the mood in the Ukrainian capital has been resolutely calm.
And here in theCUBE, we take a look at Truth Social, the new social network officially launched by former US President Donald Trump.
Welcome to the programme. The tensions between Russia and Ukraine continue to rise in the face of claims and counterclaims over an incident in Russia's southwestern region of Rostov, in which 5 people were killed. Moscow says the 5 were Ukrainian saboteurs, something that Kiev has completely refuted. It says its forces are not in that area. Hours after the incident, President Vladimir Putin held a meeting of his Security Council. He told his security chiefs that tensions with the West over Ukraine were posing a looming threat to Moscow. He also said that he's considering recognizing the independence of 2 breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine.
Our goal is to listen to our colleagues and determine our next steps in this direction. Bearing in mind both appeals of the leaders of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. To recognize their independence.
Well, if Russia moves to recognize 2 breakaway regions, it will further escalate tensions, not just with Ukraine, but also with European leaders. EU foreign affairs ministers are meeting in Brussels, where Ukraine is top of the agenda. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen earlier announced that EU leaders have given the green light to a €1.2 billion aid package to Kiev. She also reiterated the bloc's support for Ukraine, something its Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who's in Brussels, welcomed.
I want to confirm that Ukraine welcomes any diplomatic efforts aimed at conflict prevention. We believe that the most optimal format for conducting a discussion on de-escalation and the formation of new security guarantees will be to hold a summit in the format of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom and the United States, plus Ukraine, Germany and Turkey.
Well, let's head over to Brussels now and talk to our correspondent Shona Murray. Shona, it seems we've got the EU and the West faced with 2 parallel realities here from Russia. Vladimir Putin holding his security meeting, tensions being ratcheted up on the ground again militarily, but still talk of dialogue and this possible summit between President Biden and Vladimir Putin. How are EU leaders dealing with this?
Well, it has never been thus, if you think about it, Alistair, because we've had 100,000 troops, then 130,000, now up to about 180,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. But at the same time, paradoxically, Vladimir Putin saying he had no intention of invading and that this was a defensive move from Russia. But of course, the situation has escalated quite dramatically. And I'm joined now by Riho Teres, an Estonian MEP and a defence expert who's just back from Donetsk in the last few hours. Riho, we've talked about this before. You explained that this was part of a Putin playbook. Is that exactly how you feel about the situation now? Do you think war is inevitable?
Yes, I think the playbook is taking page by page the playbook as we have seen it in the past even exercises. So I think everything goes according to the plan. As we heard today, that he is about to recognize the separatist republics so he can move in with his regular troops.
Tell us what it's like in Donetsk now. You met with soldiers on the front line, some who've been there since 2014. Obviously, there's a sense that they're ready to fight. Is there a sense of foreboding? Is there any hope that they could resist a Russian invasion?
Well, there's all hope, or even they are convinced that they will be able to defend their country. They've been there in the trenches since 2014. Soldiers have experience. I saw people from the age of 22 to 56. So they are really prepared, and for them it is just a routine today. But you could see the escalation, organized escalation, violations of the ceasefire in different places, even in this area where I visited, close to Vuhledar. They just had attacks against their positions.
Do you hold out much hope that diplomacy and conversation can pull Putin back from the brink here?
Well, I have not seen any steps from the side of Russia which could give me a hope that the diplomacy has a chance. Of course, we need to keep going. We need to try to offer all possible ways to succeed with the diplomacy, but he is not taking the open hand yet.
What did you think when we saw those evacuations of civilians in parts of in eastern Ukraine to Russia? Did you feel that was a necessary thing, or was that part of the theatre?
It is part of the playbook, as you say. It is according to the plan. You do certain moves. I mean, it started with the pressure, economic pressure on Europe, turning down the gas. As we heard today, Gazprom says 95% of the gas reservoirs are empty for Europe. It started the economic pressure on Ukraine. Then, of course, the fake news campaign, which is ongoing right now. Can you imagine how mad it sounds that the small Ukraine, comparing to Russia, with much smaller armed forces, is trying to attack and take back the territories in the moment where Russia has 180,000 troops in the area? It sounds even mad if there would not be troops. But today, as Russia has massed its armed forces in the area, to blame Ukraine, that Ukraine is about to attack Russia, is just nonsense, as we all understand.
Okay, Riho Terres, Estonian MEP, just back from Donetsk. Thank you very much for joining us. Back to you,
Thank
Alistair.
you very much.
Shona Murray in Brussels, thanks very much. Well, let's now head to the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and join Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, Russia claims to have killed 5 Ukrainian saboteurs on its soil. It's also alleging other acts of aggression. All this resolutely denied by Kiev. What has the Ukrainian government been saying?
Certainly, the government calls that fake news, and the officials already announced that not a single Ukrainian soldier had been killed there, because not a single Ukrainian soldier was there on Russian territory. Ukraine does not have any forces on Russia's soil. Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba said that Ukraine did not attack any territory in Donbass and Luhansk region, did not send any saboteurs, did not shell the border crossings or the Russian territory there, and it does not plan to do so. Kyiv still insists that it can only be the diplomatic solution, and this is where it stands now, and nothing is changing for the moment here. Ukraine does not plan any offensive in the east of Ukraine, on the occupied territories or on Russian territory.
Meanwhile, separatist leaders in the east have appealed to Putin to recognize these regions as independent. How will that go down in Kiev?
That cannot go down well here in Kiev, and the fears here in Ukraine and from the Western countries are that this could lead Moscow to openly send its forces and its troops into the territory, and after that also try to expand those borders of the occupied territories in the east of Ukraine and towards the southeast of Ukraine. This is, of course, very concerning, because that would also mean practically the end of the Minsk agreement. And if the Kremlin says no to the diplomatic and the political solution and the agreement based on the Minsk agreements, that would mean that Moscow could just shut that door for any political and diplomatic dialogue.
Sasha, thanks very much. That's Sasha Vakulina in Kiev. Well, with conflict in the region appearing increasingly likely, citizens in Ukraine are having to get on with their lives in the shadow of war. While the tensions are tangible, the atmosphere remains cautiously defiant, as Mark Armstrong reports.
Despite the events unfolding and potential for disaster, Ukrainians have little choice other than to carry on with their daily lives. People in the coastal village of Mariupol enjoyed a warm afternoon on the beach. Farmers near the border with the separatist regions were fixing field machinery, having heard distant explosions the night before. What should they do? They should sit down like humans. How hard is it? I have relatives there in the rebel region. My wife has relatives in Lviv. Should we fight? Should we become divided? This is not our war, it's theirs, the state leaders, and we're the ones who suffer. People in Kiev expressed hopes that tensions in eastern Ukraine will not escalate further, following a spike in violence between Ukrainian forces and the pro-Russian rebels in recent days.
We try to stay calm and do not panic, but we're of course worried about our families and relatives who stayed in our home city, Kharkiv. We hope that the situation will improve and become better than it is now, and it will become calmer.
And there are those who think the crisis is more hype than reality.
I
think it's propaganda that's artificially created. We want peace for the whole world. Be that as it may, Ukraine has to prepare for the worst. This training session in the capital is for women, to teach them how to help protect themselves in case of a major escalation.
Still to come on the programme, is Russia interested in dialogue, as the EU Council President asked, or is Vladimir Putin bent on invading Ukraine, as the US believes? We get the views of a military analyst. This is Euronews Tonight. Thanks for being with us. Pompeii is once again under threat. Climate change and mass tourism are destroying what remains of the ancient Italian city. Smothered in lava when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, archaeologists are now racing against the clock to protect the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Catherine Bajerkian reports.
Most people know the history of the ancient Roman city Pompeii, a vibrant port city that was destroyed by a volcano. But since its excavation, it has faced new challenges: climate change and mismanagement. Now new techniques are being used to preserve what remains of the city for generations to come.
We do deep injections that go between the superficial plaster, and the wall, depending on the portion that has broken off.
In 2010, a hall where gladiators once trained collapsed. The European Union then provided more than 100 million euros to the Great Pompeii project. The goal was to preserve the already exposed parts of the important landmark.
There are places that have retained their original positions. They have retained the traces of the furniture, all the traces of the clothes. Very often family groups have been found inside the ruins of Pompeii. It's an incredible context for an archaeologist to work in, and extremely informative.
Climate change is also creating a new challenge. The site is now vulnerable to intense rainfall, and then periods of baking heat. To combat this, archaeologists are using AI to determine which of the nearly 10,000 rooms are already damaged by the weather, a task that would be impossible for the human eye. And robots will also aid researchers in restoring frescoes that have crumbled into tiny fragments.
And we leave you with a no comment from the north of England, where the torrential rain and winds of Storm Franklin are causing rivers to flood and homes to be evacuated. Thanks for watching Euronews Tonight.
The pretext ultimately to war.
There is still talk of dialogue, of course, this possible summit between Putin and Biden. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has got various meetings, including with the US Secretary of State, lined up. Is this all just going through the motions now, do you think?
Well, up until now, it's really looked like a smokescreen by the Russians on diplomacy. Of course, everyone hopes that by sort of kicking the problem down the road a bit, that will open the way ultimately to a diplomatic solution. But we're at an inflection point now in which Russia has huge amounts of military force ready to go. They've now positioned them on the Ukrainian border. So I think increasingly it looks like that diplomacy, the opportunity for that is a very, very narrow pathway now. And that it will probably know within the next couple of days, maybe less, whether this really has a chance.
And what about the West's response? I mean, we've heard that the Munich Security Conference and elsewhere, these strong warnings again, with many leaders seeming to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Is that having any impact on Putin, do you think?
Well, my own estimate is that probably the Russians have been a bit surprised by Western unity, because often in the past, Europe in particular had been divided. But I think guided by American diplomacy, but with others too, there's been a great sense of solidarity across NATO and the EU. Positions have been coordinated. The transatlantic community has stuck to its principles. It hasn't made major concessions. And so it's been very difficult, I think, for Putin to drive any wedges into that community. There's a clear message that the costs for Russia of a military intervention will be very high. And of course, this, I think, is reflecting on their risk calculation. And we saw that in today's meeting, where I think many of the security officials looked quite concerned about being asked to put on record, because this was on national and international TV, that they were opening the way to a military path in Ukraine.
Neil Melvin from the Royal United Service Institute, thanks very much for joining us there on Euronews Tonight.
Thank you.
The former US President Donald Trump has officially launched a new online platform which claims that it's censor-free. Matthew in the Cube has been taking a look.
Indeed, Alistair, 12 months after he was banned from Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, the former United States President and his team have now launched a new social network known as Truth Social. It styles itself as an open, honest, free conversation, and where there is no discrimination against any user based on their political ideology. But of course, as with this openness, there comes concerns that misinformation and extremist content could thrive. The app and the project was launched not just by Trump's media team, but also this man, Devin Nunes, a former Republican representative in the United States. And now the Truth Social joins a growing market where there are already a number of apps, ultra-conservative apps, marketed towards that audience, the likes of Gab, Getter, and also Parler. And on top of this, we're also seeing that not just any of these apps have managed to, in their words, match the popularity of the other apps that we've had, the mainstream apps. And that's very significant because Trump himself, of course, was banned from those mainstream apps for inciting real-world violence to his supporters during the storming of the US Capitol last January. And on top of this, if Truth Social is going to have any success, it will also need to work with the likes of Google and Apple when it comes to rules on content moderation. So far, a number of people have downloaded the app, including Elise Stefanik, a United States representative. And Alistair, in her first post on the Truth Social, she said that this app could be a place where free speech is protected and somewhere where big tech is broken up.
Matthew, thanks very much. Matthew Holroyd in the Cube. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has told Parliament that the country has now passed the peak of the Omicron wave as he released the UK government's roadmap to end COVID-19 restrictions. Weekly tests for staff and students will be axed, while a fourth jab for the over 75-year-olds, care home workers and vulnerable groups will be made available. The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, criticised the end of free testing and called on Johnson to provide the scientific research to back up the plan.
From this Thursday, 24th of February, we will end the legal requirement to self-isolate following a positive test. And so we will also end self-isolation support payments, although COVID provisions for statutory sick pay can still be claimed for a further month. We will end routine contact tracing and no longer ask fully vaccinated close contacts and those under 18 to test daily for 7 days.
Storm Franklin in northern England has caused severe disruptions and prompted the evacuation of hundreds of people from their homes. Roads, rivers and fields have flooded in the Yorkshire region. It's the third storm to hit the UK in a week. Coming up on the programme, archaeologists are fighting not just time but also climate change to try and save the ancient city of Pompeii. We explain more after the break.